Welcome. We are live with the system now up and running to our fourth meeting of City of Fargo Special Assessments Task Force meeting. Welcome our guests from Bismarck, Dustin Garlow and Keith Hunke. We look forward to your remarks and discussion and what you've learned from your process. Before we get too far into the agenda, has everybody had a chance to read the minutes from the prior meeting? And if so, I'll entertain a motion or corrections if needed.
I have a correction.
Okay.
On the second page, last paragraph, where it says that I said that the fact that national developers are coming to the community, I said they are not coming to the community.
So we're going to hold that thought, and I'm going to go back to roll call, so we make sure we have a record who's here, and then we'll come back to the amended motion for approval of the minutes. Diana?
Bullis? Busick? Connor?
Here.
Cosgriff? Dabbert?
Here.
Dardis?
Here.
Kremsted?
Here.
Gehrig? Grinberg?
Here.
Borowski?
Here.
Hanson?
Here.
Volk? Worth?
Here.
I did hear from Jeff Volk this morning. He was in Minneapolis and was not going to be able to call in, but expressed openness to figure out when the next meeting is. And Mr. Cosgriff had just walked in, so let the record show. Okay, back to an amended motion to correction of the minutes made by Gloria. Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Same sign, motion carried. Comments before we get started? Thoughts, perspectives? Hearing none, we'll jump right into our agenda. Gloria, thank you for preparing today's presentation on the housing market, and we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank goodness for the sunshine this morning, huh? It's been a while. It took me a little bit to put this presentation together because I had to gather the data from the other communities, and so it wasn't until yesterday that I finalized it, and I had a fit of vacation in there too. So what started the conversation was last week, or the last time we had the task force. I made the comment that we're hearing from people that are moving into this community that our home prices are higher than what theirs are from the communities they're moving from. And I've never really been able to put my finger on it or didn't do the research. So thank you for the opportunity to prompt me to do this. Why am I not clicking through here? What do I need? Do I have a clicker? Okay, thank you. Okay, contributors to housing prices. We know that there's a lot of things that go into that. So this is just a snapshot. The economy, we have a strong local economy, which is great, and which has been driving our home prices as well. Supply and demand, new construction costs also impact our existing home costs, and we know that new construction has been going up and are impacted by the labor and the material costs that they have for that. So special assessments is only a portion of that. I'm not saying this presentation that the special assessments are the driving cause of all of this. It's just a portion of it. The MLS data that I've gathered is for residential properties only and includes multifamily up to 4 units. Anything over that in our MLS system is in our commercial market, and I didn't gather any commercial data. The new construction, there are some new construction properties that go through our MLS, but it is not inclusive of all the new construction. There's much of the new construction that isn't reflected in this data. So when we look at the overall MLS market, our MLS encompasses a pretty good size area, and I didn't take it out and break it out by county. but our overall market in the since 2013 has increased 31.6%. And this takes in bedroom communities that we have been seeing growing quite a bit, Castleton, Mapleton, Horace, Argosville. And when I compare that to just Fargo, and I didn't add in West Fargo and Moorhead into this Fargo analysis because this is a Fargo task force. So the Fargo market grew during that same time period by 20%. The Fargo median home prices plus specials, when I say plus specials, when I pulled it out of our MLS data, what I pulled in for the special assessments was anything that had the unpaid specials on the property when it closed. So that will include some properties that were new construction with the new construction, and I couldn't break it out between rehab special assessments or new housing special assessments, so it's all rolled into that. So the home values have increased 33.5%. So since 2013, the median home price was $162,000, and now to date, year to date, 2017, it's $217,000. So this is where, for our first-time home buyers, it makes it difficult for them to get into the market. For example, a twin home, which 560 during the 2013-2014 time period, we were seeing multiple offers. Sometimes when they would come on the market, we were seeing offers of 5, 6, 7, 10 offers in a day on properties in the twin home, but at that point they were priced at about $154,000 with $15,000 in specials on it. Now a twin home the price is about $185,000, and the new construction ones have about $30,000 in special assessments on it. So we're getting into that $200,000 price range, what used to be our first-time home buyer price range. So, and we're not seeing the first-time home buyers in that market as strongly as we have in the past. So. Fargo housing prices compared to the wages year over year. And I think the big takeaway from this is our housing price increases have been 28% when the wages have been 12%. Now the wage data that we have came from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and we got that, the wage information for the surrounding communities as well from that. And the most recent information we had for median wages through the Bureau was up until 2016, so that's why it's not reflective of 17 and year-to-date 18 in those numbers. The regional comparison that I was able to gather, again, this came from the MLSs in those areas and for the towns, and I tried to choose like communities that I felt had similar economic drivers in there. Rochester with Mayo Clinic, Sioux Falls with their economy they have there, and then Bismarck. And you can see Bismarck also, and it was confirmed, and thank you to the Bismarck gentleman that joined us today, and I'm sure they'll talk more about this. Their data does not, for ours I rolled the special assessments into the median home price. Bismarck's is not, and their median home prices are higher than ours even without the specials rolled into it. So the MLS was not able to give me that data from their MLS. So it's considerable, our median home price compared to some of the other like communities. I think Rochester was the most surprising to me, and then Sioux Falls as well. So I thought, okay, these are drivers, but what's the income? Maybe our income, our wage income's higher. So maybe I need to compare the wage income for these communities to ours as well to see if our wages are higher and can absorb that higher priced housing. So I took a look at that as well, and again, I pulled the wage information from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And what I see is the wages are very consistent across the board. Rochester's a little bit higher with a mean wage of $55,400, but their home prices are much lower. So it was an interesting exercise and confirmed what we're hearing from residents when they're moving here from other parts of the region and even other parts of the country. Other than the coastal areas and some of the larger, I mean, if we look at like-sized communities, we are overpriced, but if they're coming from larger metropolitan areas, then that wouldn't be the same case. This is just all the places I pulled the data from. Any questions on that? Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria. Questions, observations? Kevin, I want to put you on the spot. Sure. This is consistent with what you see on the lending side with?
Yeah, I think it's consistent with what we see on the lending side, and I think the key here is, how much is specials a part of that? To your point, you rolled in the specials. The ones where I see the borrowers really get hit are like in the new construction because the specials haven't been assessed yet. And we're always conscious of homeowners who buy at a level and see the payment, and then we're trying to say, but there's specials coming. They don't see it coming. So that's one group, but at least they're a little bit more aware that there's things coming. Where it really hits people is the people in existing neighborhoods where they're on a fixed income and there's some new lights or new streets, new sewer that their budget can't handle it. So, but to the point of people moving in, yeah, we hear Fargo's expensive compared to other areas, and it can be relative if you're coming from Minneapolis to Fargo, but from the smaller communities, it's somewhat of a sticker shock to them.
Mayor Dardis?
I have a question for Gloria and maybe for Kevin both, or maybe even Mr. Dabbert. When you look at all this data and the medium prices of these homes, is there ever a breakdown, or does the city provide information where there's a breakdown on, obviously, the specials? The lenders are going to want to know that. But the land value or price versus the actual construction cost, is that readily available data? Because the first thing when I see what you see, when you look here and you look at Bismarck or you look at Rochester or Sioux Falls, the first thing I look at it or think about is it actually the construction, the nature of the type of builds we're doing, or is it the land value? Is it the price of the lots? And with that in process, I got another thing in the back of my mind of what that means when developers are marketing these lots, even when they have, the special assessments from the city.
I would just say, keep in mind that the other Sioux Falls, the other communities, St. Cloud, Rochester, they do not fund special assessments for new construction, new housing the way we do. So that's why I tried to do that comparison. I don't know, Don could probably answer that question better than I can.
Well, I think it's a worthwhile question, but we'd really have to drill down a little bit more, because depending on the density and the size of the lot and the nature of and amenities in the home, we ought not assume that a home is the same as a home is a home, right? So depending on density, we always have been talking about smart growth and smart land planning, as well as, it'd probably be more to look at as more as even as a price per square foot, or what is included in the in that house. Are they 2-stall garages or 3-stall garages and 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms? But more importantly is even on the frontage, because the main driver of the infrastructure costs is naturally how much curb and asphalt any one property has in front of it. In terms of raw land, I would say we are on par with any other communities, with what we've done and seen in other communities as far as what we would acquire raw land and then pre-platted land. It's fairly typical. Where it maybe come into play, as Gloria had said, is what are the other amenities and infrastructure costs that has to be put to that burden of each individual lot. But it's worth mentioning to say that if we can get our smart growth and density, and we have a fire station, and we either assess that fire station or a park, whatever the case may be, over 10 houses versus over 100 homes, it has to be too with the overall land size that each one of those addresses is accounting for.
I want to be respectful, and I don't want to be offensive because I don't have enough working knowledge to know the difference. Does the way that Fargo in this area do special assessments, does this somehow give the contractors, the builders, the developers, more confidence on their asking price on their lots, is part of where I'm going here, is that the special assessments are one thing, and the amenities, obviously the developers come in with their plot and try and drive that as far as the cities are concerned. But because they have that financing and they have the special assessments like this, does that give Don Dabbert extra confidence that if he's wanting X number of dollars a square foot for the dirt, that you can hold that price in your process?
I would almost say it's just the opposite. We're very much, without being offensive, we're very much at the mercy of the city. So we, being the developer, are responsible for all those taxes or all those specials or those improvements to that project, but yet we have very little say in terms of the actual design, the input, street widths, to some point, because we have to follow the land development code and, just the overall stuff, but in terms of the urban section that gets put into there, what is also a little bit frustrating is that, while essentially we're putting up a letter of credit and other things, we are not contracting with that contractor. The city is actually contracting with the contractor. So, it's not that it's not a good partnership, but sometimes we may say, well, let's do it a little bit this way, but we have no direction over that general contractor to keep him on schedule or on task or anything else that goes along with it. So to our point as being a developer, there would be some times where we would much rather be direct contracting with that underground contractor. And in most other instances, that's the way we would operate. It does get a little clunky when the city's actually as the owner of that stuff versus us just dedicating it with the plat at the end of it. This is to shed some light on that. But to go over and I guess answer your question, it's a matter of overall economic. So part of that is how many homes can we put in there in a sense to spread that improvement out over, whether it be a lift station, storm retention pond, or any of this other stuff, where some of those expenses are coming in. It was talked about last time, even a higher percentage of the infrastructure costs is the low mooring and this other, without saying flood control, but really some of those other things that are being required to do, where certainly Sioux Falls, Rochester, and some of those other cities do not have that. If we were to take a 25% factor of any one of those specials and reduce it by that same number, we would see that it's there, actually bringing it in line or even under some of those other cities. Just in my brief, look at those figures where that's at, because if I think it was brought up before at one of the other meetings that we could easily have as much as $10,000 per developed lot for either storm retention ponds, low mooring, oversized storm sewer, any of that stuff. So I think we have to recognize the fact of our cost of doing business here in a bowl, so to speak, versus some of the other cities that have the benefit of having contour and gravity to help them out. So,
Thank you.
Gloria?
One other comment, and I'm a gatherer of information until I like most of us are, I think. So I've been talking to a lot of people, and I had an opportunity to talk to an engineer from a private engineering firm here in town that does a lot of work with other surrounding local communities, cities, and I asked him, what do you feel is the driving cost, driving special assessments? And he said, I feel it's the consumer. And I said, explain that to me. And he said, well, our communities now, our clients are wanting livability communities where they want the walking paths, and they want the ponds, and they want all of these amenities that add cost to their special assessment. And I couldn't argue with him on that. So are we seeing our special assessments going up significantly because of some of those amenities we're adding into our new developments that the consumer are asking for? So, you know, it put a different perspective on it for me as well.
Well, and I just as a follow-up, and that's just it, when we're trying to lay out a community, how do we make it as appealing and affordable as a balance to pull? Most oftentimes, the developments that have the highest specials or the improvement costs are also maybe the nicest ones, and those tend to almost fill up the quickest. I would challenge it to say, you know, in West Fargo, as an example, we take great pride in the fact that, you know, we turned a soybean field of Shadowwood and Shadow Creek, and now one of the premier neighborhoods. And it was met with some resistance and quite some, you know, gut check time. Do we do the splash park and the some of the bridge and the Waikiki Park, you know, amenities that go in there? And now, you know, the average days on market by any one of those developments is, you know, lower than maybe some of the other ones. So we have to kind of gauge it with the pain threshold. While everyone wants that stuff, it's up to ultimately to the bank and the rest of them that, you know, is an affordability issue. But I would say the biggest thing that we are seeing is, Dory is spot on, is we've seen the gap widen between the wage inflation versus our cost inflation. And those have not been parallel by any means. And so that gap is really widening for that first-time home buyer or even that first-time move-up buyer to where it's no longer in their reach. But also then to that point, the unintended consequences, like I brought up before, is that if we do roll in $30,000 for improvements, and it's required then to put either a 5 or 10 or 20% down, that is additional cost, whereas right now the lenders are not requiring that down payment to fund and pay for those specials. But if the specials were rolled in, of course, we'd be requiring the 5% of that, whatever that number is, or upwards of 20% to avoid the mortgage insurance.
What would be your perception of the difference between wages and inflation and the cost? So you're going to change your plots or your size of your lots, or you're going to change the construction bill?
Yeah,
Because
absolutely. That's already driving it. Some of
one's at 28, one's at 12.
Right. Yep. Because we are having to build to what they can afford, not to maybe what we used to with the market. If we wanted to build what we wanted to build, but the market rejected it, where would we be? So unfortunately, we are constantly evolving our processes and pricing and designs to meet that. So to get the number of bedrooms or bathrooms or square footage, and that's really where you've seen that it's no mistake that going vertical is less expensive than going wider, whether it be a skyscraper or anything else. So when you're seeing that we're trying to get it more integrated in our vertical construction, is because of again, it's that footprint, the least amount of footprint that we're impacting for curb, gutter, storm runoff, and any of that stuff, and that's really what's driving it. We are largely still very much an agrarian community, and everyone seems like they want their space until they have to pay for it. And that's really when that threshold comes in. It's a balance between having enough space while they can afford it, but we're seeing the younger millennials and stuff, they are not as driven to have the white picket fence, the big backyard, everything else. That's very much more simplistic and on the go. And so that market is looking like they are far more willing to have that smaller front yard, even side yards and everything else. And so for West Fargo, that came out of that growth plan amendment is bringing those streets or those houses a little bit closer to, and not having as much of a setback. Again, smart growth and smart density. I'm not an advocate of just grid lining and having rows and rows of straight streets, but if we could still have some smarter land planning that we can accomplish density without it seeming like it's overdense. And again, it goes back that we can spread that same cost of that lift station over 1,500 homes or 1,000 homes versus 150 or 250 homes. And that's really where we can accomplish it. And then it becomes a much more of a sense of place too, when we can develop a neighborhood as a community versus just as a utilitarian street and housing.
Kevin?
So the one thing that, I think it's one thing when you know what you're going to get. In other words, the specials are fully out there, you know what, if it's a cost of living. Where we see it sometimes is the process of how specials take to get to the fully assessed can be a long period of time. So you see homeowners who buy and they look at their payment today, and as much as you try and say, okay, but you got to look out and see what's coming down the road, they don't look at that. And then all of a sudden, a year and a half, those taxes get fully assessed. It takes a while. Then all of a sudden, their monthly payment starts going up 150, 200, 250 bucks a month, and they can't afford it. And so that, at a minimum, they need that, what's going to be out there. So you, again, at least you make a conscious decision. Can I afford this or can I not afford this?
Gloria?
And part of that impact to their costs is also the tax abatement that they get for new construction. Really impacts them in that
Yep.
year.
It's a big hit.
I think there's one other thing missing in the whole discussion. What are the rest of the taxes that the people are paying? What's their property tax? What's the sales tax in all these different areas? What's their income tax rate for the state? If we really want to understand it, you got to look at the whole picture. Because I'm pretty sure, I looked it up the other day, South Dakota has 0 income tax. Minnesota's goes up to 12%. North Dakota's max is at 5, I think, something like that.
It's
So-
about as low as it can go, income tax in North Dakota.
So the whole picture has to be looked at, is my point. You can't compare a property in Rochester with one in Fargo without looking at the rest of it.
And property tax is a really big swing, because even it was enlightening to look at that budget to see that really property tax isn't even funding the basic requirements or basic needs of a city with police and fire, in terms of tax generation and bringing in. That was kind of an eye-opener, that was frankly as low on the pie chart as it was.
Okay, Christie?
You mentioned that a couple years ago, homes were selling above asking price.
Yes.
How are they selling now compares to then? When I look at homes, I see them selling much lower than asking price, and some even below property tax value or assessed values.
In some cases, that is happening, but it's fairly limited, that they're below assessed value. Yes, a few years ago, we were seeing, my son purchased a home 5 years ago, and when he bought his home, he looked at 3 houses that day. One had 15 offers, one had 14 offers, and the one he purchased had 7 offers. So and that's in the first-time home buyer market, and we are not seeing anything to that level. We see very few multiple offers in this market right now. And I'm sorry, Christy, what was your other question that you asked me?
Is that keeping homes on the market longer?
You asked me what the percent of list price that they're getting.
Right.
They're getting about 96% of list price currently, which is normal. I mean, that's pretty standard. So we are seeing some price drops in certain markets, and primarily in the upper end market. We're seeing price drops there, considerable price drops, because they're sitting on the market for some time.
Before we move into remarks from Don, Dan, did you have any thoughts to add on the Sioux Falls point made earlier, the difference between the two communities? And I believe a prior conversation you and I had, they titled their effort impact fees versus specials. Any comments you'd like to share at this point, or I'll...
Read recently within the last few
In recent months, I've had a few conversations with the Home Builders Association out of Sioux Falls, where they feel their impact fees aren't keeping up with their progress, and they're looking into some type of special assessment on new construction, as well as they do, I believe, use some type of special assessment for their reconstruction. So that's something to keep in mind also.
And they do not assess now the impact, under a definition of impact fee with?
Not for new construction, no.
Okay. Thank you. Don, you have,
No, I just wanted to supply that report to everyone to further look at, and I did not prepare for any remarks today. I have requested some additional, I sit on the Land Development Committee at NAHB, and we had a presentation. There's actually a number of different communities from around the country that are actually trying to do private bond placement for, essentially, for lack of a better word, the special assessments. And it was a very comprehensive book, so I have requested to get some more of those, and I'll share those when I get those.
and did everybody should have received this, right? Sent around? Well, thank you. Dustin and Keith, we're pleased that you're able to join us today. As I sent you the prior agendas and the notes from our first 3 meetings, you know, our goal here is to, with conclusion of today's meeting and what we learned from your efforts, is focus on the bond markets and the financing aspect of this topic, to city practice to date, how we approach, you know, specials, to you know, the impact on the industry, and moving forward from today, our goal is to roll up our sleeves and take this information and figure out which direction the task force wants to go with a set of recommendations, whether that can be all handled with city commission action, or whether that will require state statute change in the legislature. And as Blake Crosby shared with us 2 meetings ago, some of that could end up being some statutory change work that we've actually had discussion on here. So again, pleased you're here. Look forward to your remarks. And Dustin, if you'd like to tee it up.
Well, you know, I've got just a quick summary sheet of what happened. It was just literally cutting and pasting some key points from our meeting minutes. And, you know, the group was pretty wide swath of city representatives from industry like you guys have here. And, you know, we didn't really go into it with a plan. I think that's fair to say, right, Keith? I think there were some people on the task force that kind of thought there might have been somebody that had a plan, but we kind of just ended up in a certain area. And that was, without doing, I don't know how much of the history of what we went through you want, but where we ended up was to get rid of specials altogether and find a way through a combination of sales tax and implementing what we called a street utility fee, find the levels for those different functions in order to completely abolish the special assessment system that has been traditionally used in Bismarck, and also take care of some other areas of funding arterial roadway projects through a dedicated sales tax with the projects listed in the ballot language, and that's actually going to be on the November ballot for Bismarck, of a 0.5-cent sales tax increase with specific projects listed in that, so that there's no appearance of a blank check, basically, for city commission to, you know, kind of finagle things after the fact. And basically what we ended up at was targeting the concept of between the need for new arterial roadways and the maintenance fees to replace special assessments for rebuild and maintenance and reconstruction, a sales tax not to exceed 0.75% plus a per dwelling unit street utility fee somewhere in the $20 to $25 range, to be determined based on how numbers shake out once it would be approved. We ended up, after we'd made this decision, one of the things that really pushed it was the fact that the home builders got behind it. And they did it, I believe it was they said a unanimous vote of their Government Affairs Committee, that as long as the rules were the same for everybody, that they could go along with this for new build, abolishing specials, and for older parts of town. And that was really, I think, what pushed this idea over the edge as far as being a saleable idea. Unfortunately, after we went through this whole process, we discovered one sentence in a Senate bill that was passed last session, Senate Bill 2326, where a line was injected in there that basically stated that if a city does not have a certain revenue source currently, they can't create it without state approval. And that the way of getting state approval wasn't actually in the statute. So even though the bill was actually trying to prevent cities from implementing their own fuel tax, it kind of was written in a way that would apply to any revenue source. So if it's not grandfathered into your home rule charter, you either can't put it in there, or even if you do, you can't implement it, one or the other. And so we kind of ended up at the point where we need to get that one sentence taken out of code. I personally talked to Senator Dwight Cook about that, and he indicated to me that as long as this is not allowing cities to add additional revenue sources, and that it is specifically designed to allow cities to replace current revenue sources, that he thinks it could be done as far as getting through the state Senate. And I think if something like that, we're able to make it through the Senate, I think the House is a lot easier on something like this. So, and anybody who knows if Senator Cook's for something, it makes it a lot easier to do anything on the Senate side. So that's kind of where it is now. The arterial road funding plan is on the ballot in November, and then it's going to be a matter of doing some lobbying next session to allow cities to find a mix of revenue sources. And that's really the thing, is allowing cities to figure out what works best for them. Some cities, special assessments might be the better idea. If they don't have a lot of sales tax revenue, or they don't have a lot of population, then they don't really have an option. But larger cities can probably find some sort of a sales tax and utility fee mix that would work for them and allow them to drastically enhance their marketability and their competitiveness against other cities. And I think that cities like Bismarck and Fargo and Grand Forks primarily would probably be the beneficiaries of being able to have that flexibility. With that, I would answer any questions.
Christie?
So before you started the process, did you have special assessments?
Yes, we do, yeah.
And then what did you do with the people that were already assessed or had special assessments?
Well, that was the biggest stumbling block that we never actually solved, as far as the folks that would have balances, because the numbers don't jive enough so that you can reliably create a system to, for lack of a better word, buy them down. And I think that generally the government needs to get out of the buy down program, because those numbers, they just don't stick together very well. So that was left in the air. Basically, from my perspective, what we did, what I told people was, yes, you will be paying your special assessments and you'll be paying the $25 fee, but once your specials are done, you never have to pay a special again. So, everybody's got to get phased out. It's going to take a process, probably 15, 20-year process to phase out every single special on the book. And then at that point, everybody's equal, everybody's on the same playing field, and then it's all taken care of. But that was always going to be probably the hardest part of the sales pitch on this plan, was for those people that hey, I just bought a house and I got $30,000 special, you know, they're not going to like paying double, but it is only $25 a month too. So, you know, the other thought is, well, if you were buying a house that has a $30,000 special, $25 a month is probably not going to kill you.
I would like to add some context to Dustin's comment about the work that we did in the Special Assessment Task Force. We looked at very high-level numbers in 2017, taking a current balance of specials of $19.8 million and determining that it was about $25.25 per residential unit to cover all the specials for streets, street lights, sidewalks, stormwater, oversized in mains and truck lines for water and sewer. And that was for new. And then we took a look at what we had on the books, what we would need to add to retire what we had on the books. And for the first year of that, coincidentally, it was $25.26 per residential unit to retire the specials debt on the books for this year, 2018. It was last year. And then we did a rolling forward to retire all the debt on the books over a period of time going through year 2032, and it's a declining balance starting at $25 and then ended up about $4. But to Dustin's point, right away through our discussion was, well, okay, if we don't, you know, I'm paying for your specials, your future, I still have my own, and that was a complicating factor. And another unique feature to Bismarck is our system we use to track special assessments is quite dated, and when somebody comes in and pays off their specials, that record goes away, and so to try to determine any credits, if it would be a credit to try to adjust that or what have you, would be very difficult. But, at a very high level, we looked at some numbers, and $25 a month seems reasonable. There's a lot of details that get left in that, but that then was tied to our discussion of a street utility fee to use, in particular to use for special assessments that we apply to new streets or rehabbing the streets. And, ran into the little snag with the Senate Bill 2326. If we can get that addressed in the 2019 session, that might be a different avenue for us to take to address our special assessments. And I guess back to, you know, what I reviewed all your meeting minutes and looking back at our discussions with the task force. We started out in 2016 with an infrastructure task force, and they quickly focused on arterial roadways and trying to find a new revenue source for those projects. And about a year later, the special assessment task force was created, looking at specifically special assessments. And through more discussion, the city commission asked that those two task forces be combined. And so they were combined, and the outcome of that is our ballot measures that Dustin referred to here, November 6th. We're looking at additional half-cent sales tax for dedicated solely to arterial roadway constructions. We have a specific project list. And then also measure 2 is looking at, currently we buy down property taxes at the level of 25 mils, looking at capping that value of that 25 mil buy down at the 2019 rate, which is $9.6 million. And if that happens, it would allow additional discretionary revenue on our first penny to be maybe used for additional payments on special assessments. The makeup of our group, our special assessment task force, we had a cross-section of individuals from the banking business, Apartment Owners Association, Chamber of Commerce, or economic development groups. We had resident representatives from North Bismarck, Central Bismarck, South Bismarck. We had representatives from people who live in manufactured home parks. We had a member of our special assessment commission on the task force. So we had a nice mix like you have here that brought all the different issues and concerns about specials to the table. Like you, we haven't found the silver bullet. I think maybe there are some options to the point of what you were hearing from lenders. We had the same feedback when there's that delay. People go into buying their property, they think they have their mortgages figured out, and sometimes need the advice of lenders, and sometimes they don't, and a year, or it could even be 2 years later, you get this bill for specials, and all of a sudden you're upside down. So no different in Bismarck. Cost for infrastructure, we're influenced by the oil development, gas and oil development out west. That influence really hasn't gone away. We had a big uptick in construction inflation. That really hasn't decreased. Also, and I don't know if it's unique in Bismarck, but the owners of the dirt are limited. So there's probably some unique controls there on pricing that as local government we can't impact or influence. In 2014, to your point about the affordable housing, or what's affordable, in 2014, our affordable housing number based on income was $185,000. And there was nothing being built, there hasn't been really anything being built at that price point since 2014. Also, not sure here in Bismarck, we have, let's say, a handful of developers. 5 of the 6 use special assessments. We have 1 that doesn't. And so we know specials wouldn't be required. They don't need to be mandated, but again, it's an option. Years ago, what I've been told is there was a desire, to make sure those specials are available so that we had competition, so that the little guy could stay in the market. What we've seen over time in Bismarck, probably those little guys far and few between.
Could I clarify something?
Yep.
Is that all right with you?
Yep.
You mentioned there was a $25 tax for specials. Does that include the arterial roads, or does your sales tax totally cover the arterial roads, so they're 2 separate entities?
Currently, we use a portion of our sales tax to offset an arterial roadway project. We try to offer some sales tax subsidy to the homeowner who abuts that arterial, so their payment would be similar to anybody in a different neighborhood, so that they're the same, that they're not bearing extra cost because they're on arterial. We'll also use the sales tax revenue to fill the gap between any federal aid, federal and state aid we get to fund that arterial. The $25, when we rolled all the specials together just to see what would that monthly utility fee look like for that was the $25. That was all of our specials at the time.
I think just to be clear, it's $25 plus a half cent of everything you buy going forward, correct? So
Yep.
it wouldn't exempt you. If you maxed out at your $300 utility fee per year, you don't get a forgiveness on your half-cent sales tax.
No, they have, correct.
I was being facetious, but, the point is it's $300 a year plus a half a cent on there, which is a direct cost to all the new construction as well, because all the materials of which we buy is going to be charged now a half cent. So really, aren't you just shifting it from the existing neighborhoods and existing houses again and trying to put more on the backs of new construction?
There would be that impact on new construction, but then others who are buying goods would also contribute to that sales tax revenue.
But, all due respect, I mean, buying shoes and clothes versus buying, as you mentioned, north of $185,000 or $200,000 house is still pretty off balance, right?
It's a much larger number, certainly.
What's your total local sales tax? If I heard you right earlier, do you have part of that that buys down everyone's property tax as well, or did I?
Yes, correct. Currently, we have a 1 cent local sales tax, and on an annual basis, we'll buy down 25 mills of the property tax. For 19, that number is $9.6 million. We collect, our sales tax numbers have dropped. We're collecting now about $15.5 million a year in sales tax. So 9.6 of that is going to buy down property tax. And the balance, using for the allowable uses in our home rule charter, majority of that is subsidizing special assessments for our road rehab projects.
In a similar way as what voters approved here years ago with sales tax for existing neighborhoods redeveloped. Not to write down the general mill. I mean, it wasn't where you're buying down your general mill with sales tax. Just an observation, your Gloria slides, the average, the data and the analysis I've done with the average home price, the average citizen of Fargo on that home value spends $50 a month for city tax. It doesn't count specials, it doesn't count sales tax. You know, they $600-700 a year is what they pay the city in tax for what we responsible for here. You know, that's been part of the debate we had with, you know, a wheel tax or a utility tax. 30, just under 30% don't have specials with their homes, and then you know you counter that with $300 a year versus they're paying now $600 for taxes generally. That's a big jump when you look at it from a numbers standpoint. Interesting. Further comments, questions?
Could you talk a little bit about the Revamp, the Stormwater program to no longer hold projects? What was the thought process with that? The one statement on here? Was to revamp the Stormwater program to...
Certainly. Right now, we're in the midst of a cost of service rate design study for water and sewer utility. Our past practice has been to look at our watersheds on a regional basis. And when you do that, oftentimes some of that land is outside our corporate limits. And so therefore, when we create the district, do the improvements, we're assessing the city lands, but those lands outside of the city, those costs are held in abeyance. And then with that, we have a monthly charge that all properties pay to the utility, and that fund is, that revenue is used to pay those specials on an ongoing basis for those unannexed lands. And within the last 3 years or so, some of these watersheds are quite large, quite a bit of property outside of our corporate limits. So it really created kind of an imbalance in the process. So now we'll be looking at maybe creating more local ponds with extra detention. But of course, that'll have an impact when you're having to give up some of your lands to hold water for others and requiring those lands to be paid by the local development. But that's all in discussion yet, but that was the basis for that point recommendation.
You guys have a mechanism to recapture any of that? If so, if what you're going to defer those specials once that land comes into the corporate?
Yes, we do.
So then you can recapture it, refund,
we
kind of
do that.
replenish the fund, so to speak.
Do that on an annual basis.
What's the community dialogue on the two measures that you have in the city right now? What's the likeliness of those passing?
You know, so far, in a couple barometers, we've had 2 public information sessions, very light attendance, so really can't gauge from that. Prior to the city commission directing staff to create ballot language and then the city commission approving the ballot language, the Chamber of Commerce, our Economic Development Group, the Home Builders Association, the Board of Realtors surveyed their membership, and the results of that was overwhelming for support for both Measure 1, the additional half-cent sales tax, and the Measure 2, capping the 25 cents.
You mentioned earlier 5 or 6 developers use the specials route and 1 does not. Do you have any data that separates that pool, if you will, from lower cost, the developer that does not?
You know, only anecdotally, speaking with the developer who does not use specials, he says he can do things at a lesser cost, which he incorporates in his home pricing. He says some things can be done faster, control, to the point made about when you're using the special assessments and following the city process, can be a different timeline. But as far as, you know, when you look at the market, we have homes selling in all those various developments that these developers are building, really don't see a difference.
That developer has told me that between not having the overhead of city administration on the bonds and then being able to roll that money into the 30-year home mortgage, that he believes that of that cost that would normally be on specials, he's saving his buyers 20 to 25%. So over the 30 years. And then obviously it's because it's spread over 30 rather than 7 or 15 or whatever the specials would be over the annual payment for that is probably less than half of what it would be on the specials. So it's an overall cost savings, and then it's spread out over more years. And so according to him, that I think he said something like on a $300,000 property, it could be upwards of $20,000 difference in a worst case scenario.
Presumption there would be they follow the specs of the city when they build streets.
Right. Right.
Kent, you look like you're chomping at the bit over there. Introduce yourself, please, for those.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add a little value if I could. I just recently attended the Minnesota GFOA conference. That's the government finance people in Minnesota. We are a member, Fargo is a member because we're more like Minnesota communities than we are North Dakota. And the issue of there was some of the suburbs are starting to look at a significant increase in their franchise fees. Now that's the tax on your electric and gas provided by Xcel Energy or Cass County Electric in this community. So they're increasing those significantly with the goal of reducing, and I'm not sure elimination was in the mix, but a significant reduction in assessment. So then you get in this issue about double taxation and inequity of somebody paying for somebody else's specials. One of the communities that has already implemented a rebate program where they actually collect the fee, but then at the end of the year, much like some of the state programs, you can apply for a refund of that overtaxation piece. So if you paid extra on your utility bill and you still have specials out there that are running, it's structured that you could send a rebate request to the city, and the city would just simply rebate you your double taxation in an attempt to try to make it more equitable. So I just wanted to share that idea with you because other communities are trying to deal with this issue about how do you escape from specials and how do you do it in an equitable basis. It'd be awesome if there would be a way that we could pay off the $400 million worth of special debt that we have right now, just wipe the slate clean and magically start over with a new program. But I think you need to be very sensitive to the needs of those people that are continuing to pay their special assessments, in this case over maybe the next 20 to 25 years. So an abrupt shift out of specials then leaves somebody else paying double. So I think that's should be a concern. But I did want to share that Minnesota model with you. I think that has just surfaced within the last couple of years because they're experiencing some of the same issues. I also followed a story in Woodbury, Minnesota, where maybe a month ago, the developers that are charging impact fees got taken to task in the courts, and they lost. They were charging too much on their impact fees. And why is that? Would they be wanting to charge too much? Well, it's likely it's caused directly because of the inflation effects of the ongoing construction inflation, land inflation, all this inflation we're talking about year over year over year. It just simply costs more money to deploy infrastructure. But anyway, I just want to share that. That was a fresh thought I had and something new and fairly creative, I think, the rebate program.
Kent, did you want to share any of the research you've done to date on low bid, and are you ready to talk about that, or is it still in?
Excuse me, I didn't hear the
question. On the opportunity on low bid and, the impact of, inflationary costs, which we've learned that just on product for pipe, for example, has gone up 10% year by year versus, it doesn't even come close to the inflationary factor. As a tool, whether we legally can do it now or if it's going to require legislative change and be able to have low bid and then renegotiate to drive and really get a true glimpse of the numbers and drive the cost down further.
I would think I would simply want to comment on what I learned in a discussion recently. There is some codification of state law, and I believe at this point it just pertains to state agencies and the state procurement process, and it's a term called best and final offer, BFOA, best and final offer. And the gist of that is it's much, from what I've learned about it, and we've just done a very limited research, but you would call for bids or set up a spec, you would get people in a bid pool, and then you could screen out in whatever manner you wanted to, bring them to the table, and then further negotiate from their bid and say, okay, we'd really like you to do this project. We think it's a tad expensive. We'd like you to lower your costs by 10%. You have one opportunity to make your best and final offer, and then the commission would simply accept whoever is willing to negotiate their fees down. We haven't researched to any extent how the state is using this, but our bond counsel that helps us with bonds has looked at it and has flyspecced and said it does exist in state law. So if it does exist in state law, it seems logical that they could extend the law and that practice to political subs directly to allow them to use best and final offer. That seemed like a fairly astute idea. Again, that's not in practice. We've never used it. I didn't even know about it until about a week ago, but it seems logical.
Don?
I think.
Thank you, Ken.
One thing we should look at too, the current system is slightly punitive to not use specials. So even if I were to go out and hire a private engineer and design everything and go through, the fees associated with still building with inside of the city right-of-way and building to city spec, in terms of everything else, when the Ponyland project on 32nd Avenue North, due to some time of the year that we wanted to get in there, we took a hard look at trying to do it privately. The costs of the pipe in the ground, so to speak, were very much on par with what the bids we got. The difference were that we would still have to pay a private engineer in addition to paying the city engineer to all that other stuff. It was actually going to, for round numbers, without exactly remembering, is going to be between 3 and 4% additional for me to do it privately, as opposed to running it through special assessments and having the city administer it. So I think if we could take a look at it to see, is like, as mentioned, for the impact fees, is a fee for the service. What does it really cost the city to administer another bonded private engineer, in some cases of one of those same engineering firms that they would already have as retainer and consult to do some of their other work anyway? So it seems like we're trying to hire somebody to watch somebody that we're hiring them as an expert already. So it seems a little, I mean, if we could hold that private engineer accountable to make sure that it is the way it is, and with the bond or anything else or some assurance, it seems like there would be some cost savings that we would not maybe be doubling up on.
Okay. Further questions or comments from the group for Dustin or Keith? Bill?
Just a question for the visitors. What's the reception been in Bismarck? We're taking the city out of the picture of the sidewalk replacements and driveways and approaches and that type of thing, turning it over to the private sector.
There hasn't been a lot of public discussion about that matter, but we have a fairly new city engineer. He's been on board for a little over 2 years, and that's something he and I have been talking about, is as he's looking at his workforce, number of them approaching retirement, those positions were dedicated to taking care of our curb and gutter and sidewalk work, and that's something that we'll be doing some analysis on and doing that. And I guess, end of the day, if those pieces of infrastructure are built to appropriate standards, our city spec, so to speak, it might be okay. But interesting, I don't know if that's been a discussion here in the community, but it hasn't been very public in Bismarck. But again, that might be one of those things where it does eliminate a special assessment cost.
Sure. Which is currently in Fargo is an option, if I read it right, where the owner can either take it on themselves to do it, and or the city special assesses them for it.
You're talking in the case of a development or an individual homeowner?
Individual homeowners.
I think you're referring to when we have to rehab a sidewalk and approach. Yeah. So you have the ability to have the city contractor who has bid multiple sidewalks together to get the best competitive bid. If you find that you would get someone for less expensive, that's still a city bonded contractor for both because we have to get our inspection for both the sidewalk and the approach. The difference comes into play is that when the city would come in and do it with their approved contractor, you don't ever see the bill, versus hypothetically, if I were to come do it for you 30 days later, I'll be sending you an invoice, of which we won't take 30-year payments, essentially, right? So I think it comes into, speaking of, fixed incomes and everything else, it's a matter of someone being able to come up with, maybe arguably, depending on the size of the lot, anywhere from $7,000 to $10,000 worth of out-of-pocket expense that, in the absence of having that cash or ability to go get a second mortgage or anything else, I mean, all the other fees come in. So I think there's certainly that argument or benefit from being able to have somebody that can pay for that sidewalk over 15 years as opposed to having to pay for it all up front.
Sure. So it's either a pay for it over time at a percentage plus the work, or out of pocket.
Correct.
A lot of it would depend upon the individual then.
Correct. But that option still exists, even as whether it's a special assessment for a sidewalk or a street light or the curb and gutter from your house. So if someone were to be able to look at it and say, I'm only getting X% on my cash for this, the interest rate on the assessment that they'll be charging me for the money is this, well, I would much rather take my cash or home equity loan or anything else and pay that off. So that is a blanket across everything, can be paid off at any time with no prepayment penalty, so to speak.
Okay. Thanks.
Kevin?
But you'd also have to worry about the case of if you eliminate it like this totally where it's not an option to go to the city, you would have borrowers that maybe they had some financial difficulties, the divorce, health, whatever, you have bad credit, and you get a bill and you can't get a loan, what would you do? Where now at least you have the option where the city would run it through specials, and if you want to pay it off, you can.
Okay.
Another general question, going back to what I was listening to earlier, when you were mentioning the additional amenities that everyone is asking for. At some point in time, all of those amenities are going to require either maintenance or reconstruction over time. So what happens at that point then? They're special assessed to begin with. What happens when downstream so many years they've got to be replaced or repaired? Who pays for that? And how is it handled?
That's a
The
good
walking
question.
paths and the parks and the ponds. And
Yeah, is that part of a neighborhood association, or is that the city's responsibility, or like Don?
So there's some of both. There's some that are private land and held within the homeowners association. That homeowners association charges a fee to take care of the green space or the park or the private park. There's a distinct difference between a private park and then the public park. But in the case of a walking path or anything else, it'd be no different than a bike path in downtown Fargo that has to be torn out and redone because of its useful life. The improvement district would be created for a 6-block area, and those people within that improvement district would end up paying to rehab or refurbish whatever asset the city, because that's really a city asset at that point because it's in the city public right away. And so then it's up to the city or the residents as to how that gets funded. But now the distinct difference, if we're putting it in the first time, the citizens in that improvement district and the developer are paying 100% of the acquisition and installation of that asset, whereas if it's in an existing neighborhood, it's a 70-30. So the city is picking up 70 cents of the first dollar, and then that private citizen is only picking up, I say only, but 30% of that rehab or replacement of that asset.
Okay.
And so that's why it's important to draw a very clear distinction between the green fields and the rehab, because the rehab, they're not being assessed a full dollar. They're paying 30 cents on the dollar. I mean, that is a huge difference.
Huge difference.
Yeah, 70% off I mean, all of us would be, beating the doors down to go buy any product at 70% off, right? That normally would be go across the street to a new street and it's full retail. So I think it's important to take a look at those things. Even that sidewalk we talked about before, we'd have to take a look at it. So you may, if using a $10,000 example, I think we'd probably have to drill down to this, but you may be only, when I say you, that resident may only be getting special assessed $3,000. Well, I'm not going to give you a 70% discount. I'm going to be charging you full retail.
Full bore, yeah.
So that's a big balance right there.
Okay.
Brenda? You have that look.
Good afternoon. In regards to the amenities, it's really kind of dependent on what we're talking about. So when we have a trail adjacent to the right-of-way, then it becomes a right-of-way issue, and that's your adjacent sidewalk. When we have trails that are on parkland, then the park is taking over the maintenance of those trails. So it's kind of, that's where those dependencies run. We work hard on the green fields to try and, actually, according to Land Development Code, have double fronting lots. So we work very hard so that a homeowner doesn't have a road in the back with a sidewalk and a road in the front with a sidewalk. Because then when you are looking at maintenance, those are large maintenance costs that have to be covered by the whole assessment, the assessment district as a whole. So those are things that we try and look at. Now, in regards to, some of the pond features, the maintenance of those can depend on, when they're regional, then the city takes over those maintenance. We'll do minimum maintenance within our budget. If there's a huge project that we need to go in and do some major, then we'll look at that original assessment district and go back to that to work on those costs. And then also we'll follow whatever our funding policy is. Typically, our replacement funding policies, the city's kicking in some of those monies also. It's not a full assessment.
Thank you, Brenda. Further comments, questions? Moving forward, for the outline, when we started our work, the goal was to have 4 meetings with information, background, fact, and then move into November with the sole agenda item of a series of meetings, roll up our sleeves and go to work in what direction you want to take this. And so I would throw out that from city staff and myself as chair, if that's still the flavor of direction you want to go, then we will pursue that series of meetings in November with solely that agenda item. What do you want to start to work on in advance as a set of recommendations? The thought process then would be to have a public forum when we have, a set of recommendations and some traction to the effort of the task force, and seek public input, and then have a final meeting sometime by mid-December, concluding the report, so it would be completed by the end of the year. Does that still seem like a logical next step for your interest and your leadership in this group? That said, see a nodding of heads. 7:30 a.m. back to start with a meeting is the best for everyone. We accommodated 11:30 to 1 today for our friends from Bismarck, so they didn't have to leave at whatever time to get here if they wanted to come that morning. But if the 7:30 a.m. start is the sense of best time of day, then we'll have Diana or Shelley send out a poll to look at best dates, to look at your calendars so that we can get a date set for, I'll call the roll up the sleeves meeting, so that everyone can be in attendance, because I know challenging schedules sometimes often, even if we're 2 or 3 weeks out with posting the date, it's still better to do a survey, I think, so that we get to this point, everybody's had that chance to look at their calendars and weigh in before we set the meeting. So want to thank Dustin and Keith. Valuable insight. As the state's 2 largest cities, if it comes to change in the legislature, we have a lot of clout. And we'll see what our group comes up with, and we should have kind of a circle back meeting with your group and your leadership and what we come up with, and figure out from a standpoint of what we need to do in Bismarck next session. I know you've walked the halls, I've walked the halls, we know the process, and could be part of our solution. And we also had some preliminary discussion, what has been tagged the Prairie Dog Fund. Representative Carlson and Senator Wardner announced, a pool of dollars for cities and counties. Quite frankly, we see if that is to come, it's going to have a huge impact on how we go about the cost of infrastructure, rehab, and impact on homeowners. So I'm sure Bismarck is watching that as well. So, final comments before we adjourn? Suggestions, requests? We'll provide a, Kurt?
Yeah, I have one quick question. In the email that had been going around with my questions on it, Brenda had responded that it's in the annual report for the first 4 questions. Can we get a copy of the annual report?
Annual report, would that be Ben Hushka's report?
The
basically-
first question, we had a spreadsheet. Did that get put in their book from last week? Okay, we do have a spreadsheet that we took all the different annual reports, and we do have that information, so we can get that out to you.
Okay, that would, for me, that would
Correct.
help define what the total dollars are we're looking at for the new construction and the rehab.
And then we also have just a synopsis of your second question, and I will send that out also. And then, do you guys give the books back? Do you guys take the books back? They keep them. Okay, so we'll have hole punched ready for you to keep in those books also. So you can look at the PDFs, but we'll plan on having those hole punch copies for you.
You get that to Diana, then she can send it to us.
Yep. So we did a spreadsheet for all the different costs in the years. And so we've got that for you. And then also what other cities we've been seeing. There was a survey done on what cities have been doing special assessments. So we have kind of a little synopsis of that.
Sounds good.
We'll see the Gloria slide sent around as well, so everybody has a copy of that. Allow a few minutes for anybody from the public who wants to make any remarks. Seeing none, is there a motion to adjourn? Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Same sign, motion carries. Thank you.